My wife doesn't love me, and she has never loved our child, either. On the day our son was born, she didn't even spare him a glance before heartlessly tossing him into my arms. When her first love eventually returned to the States, that normally cold and indifferent woman got blindingly drunk at home for the first time. She laughed hysterically while clutching our child, and Leo happily wrapped his little arms around her neck. He whispered to me, "Dad, what happened to Auntie?" I knelt down to pull him into a hug, my eyes burning with unshed tears as I tried to explain the situation. She is happy because the man she loves is back, so we shouldn't disturb her anymore. We're going to move out. I tucked my son in a bed and then retreated to the guest room alone. I opened my laptop and began the painful process of drafting our divorce papers. This year marks the 7th anniversary of my marriage to Ava Miller, and it is also the 7th year we have lived as strangers under the same roof. After all this time, I have finally decided to let her go. I heard a soft knock at the door, and when I opened it, I found my 7-year-old son, Leo, standing there with his toy airplane. "Dad, are we really moving out?" he asked, looking up at me with a gaze full of hesitation and longing. But Annie actually hugged me tonight. Does that mean she is finally starting to like me? I froze for a moment, my heart breaking at his innocent hope. Throughout our 7 years of marriage, Ava Miller never allowed Leo to call her mom. When he was only 2, she took him to a grocery store in Chicago and ran into someone she knew. Because our son accidentally let the word mom slip, she set the toddler down on the cold floor and forced him to find his own way back. By the time he reached the house, he had fallen so many times he had lost count, and his little knees and palms were covered in bloody scrapes. When he turned 4, he begged her for months until she finally agreed to take him to Navy Pier. But once again, because he called her mom in a moment of excitement, Ava violently let go of his hand. She deliberately let a 4-year-old boy get lost in the sea of strangers. By the time I found him, he was hiding in some bushes, sobbing so hard he could barely catch his breath. From that day forward, my son only referred to her as Annie, and our marriage became a pathetic joke. Thinking about those memories made my chest ache, and I couldn't help but pull him into a tight embrace. Leo, the person Annie loves, is coming home, and we cannot stay in this house any longer. His eyes lost their spark, but he quickly shoved the toy airplane toward me again, trying to stay positive. "But Dad, Annie gave me a present tonight. If she didn't like me, why would she give me a gift?" He looked at me with such desperation, trying to find any scrap of evidence that his mother actually cared about him. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words died in my throat because I simply did not know what to say to him. Should I tell him that Ava was only happy because Ethan was coming back? Should I tell him that the gift was just a byproduct of her excitement for another man? I couldn't bring myself to shatter his heart, so I simply swallowed the bitterness rising in my chest and protected my child with a comforting lie. I kissed his forehead and discreetly wiped the moisture from my eyes before he could notice. This was the fragile illusion a father works so hard to maintain, even when his own world is falling apart. I suppressed the urge to break down and forced a gentle smile before I spoke to him. "Leo, if I want to take you away and live somewhere else without Annie, would you be okay with that?" My son went stiff for a second before whispering, "Can't we stay?" I haven't even had the chance to call her mom yet. I couldn't hold back the tears any longer, and I had to bite my lip to keep from sobbing out loud. "Leo, the truth is that Annie doesn't want us in her house anymore. I'm going to take care of you, okay?" He pulled his hand away and clutched that toy airplane against his chest as if it were a shield. After a long, heavy silence, he spoke up. "I want to give Annie 3 more chances. If she still doesn't like us by then, we can leave forever." I closed my eyes and slowly nodded, granting his heartbreaking request. "Fine, Ava, my son and I will give you 3 more chances. But after those are gone, you will be nothing to us ever again." It was Friday, the day Ava's first love was scheduled to return to Chicago. They had been college sweethearts and got engaged almost immediately after graduation. However, just a month before the wedding, Ethan fell for a woman he met while traveling in France. Without a second thought, He abandoned Ava and moved to Europe to pursue what he called his true soulmate. They went their separate ways, and Ava spiraled into a dark depression that lasted for years because of his betrayal. It was during that vulnerable time in her life that I was hired as her personal assistant at the Miller Group. One drunken night eventually led to an unexpected pregnancy and the birth of our son. I became her secret husband, but both my son and I were treated like invisible burdens in her life. After I finished printing the divorce papers, I sat down to type out my formal resignation letter. Unlike Leo, I had long ago grown accustomed to Ava's icy indifference. I was no longer the fool waiting for a woman who would never truly come home to me. 7 years was more than enough time for my illusions to finally crumble into dust. "James, are you seriously resigning?" a coworker whispered, catching a glimpse of my computer screen. I offered a practiced smile and gave the excuse I had rehearsed in my head for weeks. "Yeah, my son's mother is living in San Francisco, and I'm planning to take him there so we can finally be a family." My colleague nodded understandingly and said that it made sense since raising a kid alone was so difficult. He mentioned that everyone in the office actually thought I was a single father. I couldn't help but let out a short, hollow laugh at the irony of his words. I wasn't technically a single father, but my reality was actually far lonelier than being one. My eyes began to sting with heat, so I quickly fixed my professional mask to ensure no one saw my weakness. Right after I handed him my notice, Ava walked into the office with Ethan trailing behind her. He had a smug, gentle smile plastered across his face as he walked in. Ava followed him like a shadow, her eyes fixed on him with an intensity she had never shown me. A coworker nudged my arm and whispered that it looked like our CEO was finally showing some human emotion. I forced a polite smile while feeling like my entire world was being washed away by a storm. Some things might take a decade to change, but I knew that even if I waited an entire lifetime, Ava would never look at me that way. As I walked past my desk, I couldn't stop myself from calling out her name. Before I could even finish my sentence, she shot me a look so cold it felt like ice water. "Is there something you need, James?" she asked. Her distant tone was a clear warning for me to shut up and stay in my lane as her subordinate. I looked down at my shoes and fought with everything I had to hide the redness in my eyes. "I apologize, Ms. Miller," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Ava gave a curt nod and immediately turned her attention back to Ethan as if I had ceased to exist. She was my legal wife and the mother of my son, yet she stood there shamelessly flaunting her affection for another man right in front of me. The irony was enough to make me finally wake up from my long, painful dream. I had intended to tell her about my resignation, but I realized in that moment that she wouldn't care anyway. She had never once truly cared about my presence in her life. She never cared about my feelings or our child's well-being. She certainly didn't care about a marriage that had been a hollow shell from the very beginning. When I sat back down at my desk, I received a call on my son's smartwatch. "Dad, there's a parent-teacher conference tonight, so school ended early. Auntie brought me here to see you." I froze in shock and immediately stood up to head toward the lobby. But as I turned the corner, I saw Ava reaching out to tenderly fix Ethan's hair. Not far away, my son stood by the elevators, staring blankly as his mother shared an intimate moment with a complete stranger. That was a level of tenderness and patience that neither my son nor I had ever received from her. I was about to rush over and pull him away when Ava finally spotted him. Her entire body went rigid, and she instinctively yanked her hand away from Ethan. But a second later, she simply walked past our son without a word, shielding Ethan as if Leo were just some random child she didn't recognize. A sharp, stabbing pain flared in my chest as I hurried over to grab my son and lead him back to my desk. Before I could even offer an explanation, Leo's eyes filled with tears. "Dad, is it the man Annie loves?" he asked quietly. In that moment, I lost the ability to speak and could only nod as tears blurred my vision. Leo didn't say another word. He just pulled out his homework and started writing, though his tears were quickly soaking into the paper. I pulled my son into my arms, knowing he was the only person in the world who truly mattered to me. "Ava," After we walk out that door, you will only have 2 chances left to make things right. We packed our things and prepared to head back to our lonely apartment. On the drive home, Leo looked at me and asked if Annie could come to the parent-teacher conference tonight. In all 7 years of his life, Ava had never once attended a single school event for him. Looking at the flicker of hope in his eyes, I didn't have the heart to tell him no. I pulled out my phone and sent an iMessage to Ava asking if she was free for Leo's conference tonight. I hit send, and, as expected, I was met with nothing but a deafening silence. Leo lowered his head and clutched his backpack tighter. "She doesn't want to come, does she?" he whispered. He then looked up with a forced, mature smile, trying his best to act like it didn't hurt. "It's okay. Auntie is very busy with work, and I understand," he said bravely. Hearing those words from a 7-year-old boy made my heart feel like it was being crushed by a ton of lead. I could barely breathe from the emotional weight of it all. Just as I was about to respond, my phone buzzed in my pocket with a text from Ava. "I'm free. I'll be there," she wrote. A surge of genuine shock and excitement hit me, and I couldn't wait to show the screen to my son. "Leo, look. Mom said she is actually coming tonight." Leo froze in disbelief for a second before his face lit up with the biggest smile I had seen in months. In 7 long years, this was the first time Ava had ever agreed to show up for him at school. Because of her positive response, Leo talked excitedly all the way back to the house. He kept telling me about all the praise his teacher gave him, his high test scores, and all the awards he had won recently. He also reminded me that he had been elected class president, and his teacher was going to announce it officially during the meeting tonight. Then he looked at me with wide eyes and asked, "Dad, if Mom finds out how well I'm doing in school, do you think she'll like me more?" I hesitated for a moment, feeling a fresh wave of agony in my chest. I silently prayed that Ava wouldn't bail on us this time. Before we left for good, I just wanted my son to have this one moment of happiness, even if it was based on a lie. The clock on the living room wall kept ticking, and the start of the meeting was drawing closer and closer. However, Ava was nowhere to be found. Instead, I saw that Ethan had just updated his Facebook status. In the picture, Ava was sitting next to a young boy I didn't recognize, patiently teaching him how to build a Lego set. The caption on the photo simply read, "A future amazing mother." I turned my gaze to the living room, where my own son was sitting quietly on the sofa with his toys. It was the exact same Lego set, the same age group, and the same desperate need for companionship. Yet he had never experienced that side of Ava in his entire life. Leo felt me watching him and seemed to sense the shift in the air. He looked up and asked cautiously, "Dad, is Mom busy with work again?" I looked into his innocent eyes and found that I couldn't bring myself to tell him the truth. His mother wasn't busy at all. She was just playing parent with another man's child. I was completely speechless, so I did the only thing I knew how to do. I pulled him into a hug and told him that everything would be okay. "You still have me, and I will always be right here for you," I said. My son, being far too mature for his age, didn't ask anything else. His eyes turned a painful shade of red, but neither of us mentioned Ava on the drive to the school. It was as if her promise had never existed and our family had always just been the two of us. "Ava, you are down to your last chance." After I parked the car, I took Leo's hand and walked toward the entrance of the elementary school. But the moment we stepped into his classroom, I completely froze. "Ava," I stammered. She was sitting in a chair by the window. When she heard my voice, she looked up at us, and I could see her eyes widen in surprise. "You're here," she said, her tone sounding genuinely shocked. A terrible feeling of dread began to pool in my stomach. My son had been attending this school for 6 months, yet Ava Miller didn't even know which classroom was his. Leo didn't notice the tension and excitedly ran over to her side. "Mom, you actually came," he cried out. Ava immediately frowned and asked him what he had just called her. My son's face fell for a second before he quickly corrected himself. "Auntie, you're sitting in the wrong spot. My desk is actually in the front row." He looked at her with so much hope in his eyes. He really thought she was finally keeping her promise to him for the first time. But that excitement was cruelly short-lived. A second later, Ava looked away from him. I'm not in the wrong seat, Leo. This is exactly where I'm supposed to be, she said firmly. Leo was about to say something else when he was suddenly shoved aside by another child. Move out of the way. This is my mom, the boy shouted. I acted on instinct and immediately pulled Leo into my arms to protect him. Ava stood up quickly, but she froze when she saw Ethan standing in the doorway, looking surprised. She pulled her hand back and placed it protectively on the other boy's shoulder. Mason didn't mean it. I apologize on his behalf, she said stiffly. Leo, and I just stared at her in shock. That kind of motherly protection and care was something my son had never once felt from her. Who is this child, Ava? I asked, my voice trembling. She hesitated for a moment, and I saw a flicker of guilt cross her face when our eyes met. He is a friend's son, she replied. Is that right? I whispered, mostly to myself. I knew deep down that this was the same boy from the Facebook photo Ethan had posted earlier. Right on cue, Ethan walked into the classroom carrying a bottle of water. He looked surprised to see us there. James? Are you here for the parent-teacher meeting too? Ethan asked with a smirk. Where's the boy's mother? Why isn't she here with you? I looked directly at Ava, but she refused to meet my eyes. I realized then that she was terrified I would expose our marriage in front of Ethan. My mind drifted back to the day Ethan first arrived back in the city. That was the day that the usually cold woman got drunk and actually smiled for the first time in years. When she let Leo call her mom that night, we both thought that we were finally going to have the happy family we had always dreamed of. But then she whispered Ethan's name, and I realized she was only showing Leo affection because she was hallucinating and thought he was Ethan. I squeezed Leo's hand, ready to defend him, but my son spoke up before I could. My mother is out of the country right now, Leo said clearly. She is very busy, and I don't want to bother her with school things. Both Ava and Ethan were stunned into silence by his words. I looked down and saw that Leo's eyes were rimmed with red. He looked at Ava and forced a brave, mature smile. Annie Miller, my dad and I are going to leave now. Every ounce of grief I possessed seemed to swell in my chest as I turned to walk away. Suddenly, Ava reached out and grabbed my arm. What did Leo just say? Ava asked, staring at our son as if she were trying to process a shock. Was she finally realizing that the child she had spent years pushing away had finally learned to stay away on his own? I felt a wave of bitter irony wash over me. He didn't say anything at all, Ms. Miller. The meeting is about to start. I gently removed her hand from my arm and led Leo to the front row to find his actual seat. Even with my back turned, I could feel her staring at us. However, no amount of attention from her could ever warm my heart again. The conference began right on schedule, and I kept a protective arm around my son's shoulders. For the first time, I wish the teacher would speak louder so I wouldn't have to hear the happy family chatter coming from Ava, Ethan, and Mason behind us. Just as Leo had predicted, the teacher called out his name to the entire room. She announced that he was the class president and invited him to the front to give a speech. But Leo shook his head and refused to move or say a single word. I knew exactly why he was staying in his seat. He couldn't bear to look at Ava while she was sitting next to another man's son. He didn't want to acknowledge that his mother would rather play house with a stranger's kid than support him. He certainly didn't want to call her mom in front of everyone anymore. After the meeting ended, I took Leo to the main office to finalize the paperwork for his withdrawal from the school. As we walked out to the parking lot, we saw Ava waiting by the sidewalk. She was holding a stick of blue cotton candy in her hand. What took you so long? Let's all go home together, Ava said, extending the cotton candy toward Leo. Going home together as a family was once the only thing Leo and I ever wanted. Now, the very idea felt like a cruel joke. Leo reached out and took the candy from her, and a small smile finally broke through his sad expression. Seeing that spark of hope in him made my heart soften for a moment. I was just about to agree to go home with her when she spoke again. You see, Mason is a new transfer student, so he didn't get a chance to run for class president earlier this term. I was thinking you could have Leo tell the teacher that he doesn't want to be president after all, and let Mason take the position instead. Her casual tone made both of us go cold. I should have known that every gift from her came with a hidden price tag. Even a simple stick of cotton candy was just a bribe. Okay, Annie Miller, Leo said, his voice flat. Leo's eyes were rimmed with red as he stuffed a large piece of the candy into his mouth. Ava's expression relaxed, thinking she had gotten what she wanted. But as she reached for Leo's hand, her phone started ringing. It was Ethan on the line, telling her that Mason wasn't feeling well and asking if she could come find them immediately. Ava's face filled with worry, and she immediately turned to get into her car. Just as she was about to pull the door shut, Leo suddenly screamed, "Mom!" Ava froze with her hand on the handle, looking back at my son's tear-filled eyes. After a long, painful silence, she simply said, "Take care of yourself," and shut the door. She didn't correct him that time, but the damage was already done. That was the very last time Leo would ever call her mom. That night, Leo and I packed our remaining belongings and booked our flights to San Francisco. We didn't speak of Ava Miller again. There would no longer be a lamp left on in the hallway to welcome her home. Early the next morning, we took our luggage to the airport and boarded our flight. Just before the flight attendants asked us to switch to airplane mode, I sent Ava one last message wishing her a happy life. A second later, my phone began to vibrate incessantly as messages started pouring in. My finger hovered over the power button, but I hesitated for just a moment. Leo noticed my hesitation and glanced at the screen, his eyes immediately welling up with tears again. He gently tugged on my sleeve and whispered that it was time for us to leave this all behind. I ruffled his hair, feeling a sharp pang of sadness at how quickly he was being forced to grow up. Back at the Miller Group headquarters, Ava stared at the notification on her screen, her brow furrowing in confusion. She had rushed over to Ethan's place the day before, only to find that Mason was perfectly fine and just throwing a tantrum because he wanted fast food. In that moment, she had thought of Leo, whom she had abandoned on the sidewalk, and felt a tiny flicker of guilt. She noticed how happy Mason was while eating, and she figured that if she took Leo out for a treat today, he would probably be just as thrilled. "Ava!" Ethan's voice suddenly broke through her internal monologue. Ava stared at Ethan, who was wearing a sheer black V-neck shirt, and she couldn't help but frown at the sight. James had a fantastic build, but he always dressed modestly and professionally, never feeling the need to flaunt himself like this. Misinterpreting her silence as attraction, Ethan assumed she was admiring his body and leaned in even closer to her. "The clients have arrived, and the board members are already in the conference room," Ethan said, leaning in closer. "Let me join you for this meeting." A cloying scent of roses drifted off him, causing Ava to sneeze several times. Ava was actually allergic to heavy perfumes, a fact I had learned years ago, leading me to throw away all my colognes and even switch my shampoo to a faint, natural tea scent. Yet Ethan, her former fiancé who had supposedly known her for years, had completely forgotten about her allergy. Ava silently stepped back to create some distance before heading toward the boardroom. She had promised to help Ethan get back into the corporate world, and she viewed this meeting as the perfect chance to reintroduce him to the industry. She wanted to send a clear message to the staff that Ethan Davis was under her personal protection. Taking her silence as a green light, Ethan followed her inside with a confident stride. Throughout the office, the staff had already been gossiping about the handsome new assistant they had seen lounging in the executive suite. The room fell into a sudden, heavy silence the moment Ava walked in. She ignored the tension and opened the primary folder sitting on the mahogany table. After just one glance at the first page, her expression soured. The other executives began looking through their own copies, their faces twisting into masks of confusion and disapproval. Every single page of the contract was covered in bright watercolor stains, and the word yes scribbled in messy, childish handwriting. Ava slammed the folder onto the table, her voice dropping to a dangerous chill. Who is responsible for this? Does anyone in this room possess even a shred of professional competence? The department heads exchanged nervous glances but remained silent. These files have been sent to the executive suite hours ago to be finalized and printed by her personal staff. If there was a disaster, the fault lay at the top. Ava scanned the room with a darkening gaze before barking out a single order. Get James Smith in here right now. The HR director cleared his throat, looking incredibly uncomfortable. Ms. Miller, regarding James Smith. But the lead client cut him off by throwing his folder onto the table in disgust. Look, if this is how your firm handles multi-million-dollar contracts, then we are clearly wasting our time here. Everyone leaned in to see what had caused the outburst, finding a crude drawing of a turtle right over the client's signature line, accompanied by a few nasty insults. Ava's face went completely pale. She had never imagined that the man she was trying so hard to promote would be the one to sabotage her so spectacularly. Ethan started to tear up, looking like a kicked puppy as he stammered, "I am so sorry. I didn't think Mason would." The client didn't care about his excuses and snapped, "Who even are you?" "I'm speaking to the CEO, not the help." Ava rubbed her temples, feeling a massive headache coming on, and stood up to address the room. "Please accept my apologies. This was a severe oversight on our part," Ava said, trying to maintain her composure. "I will have a clean contract drafted immediately, and as a gesture of goodwill, we are prepared to offer an additional 3% discount." The client sat in stony silence, weighing the financial gain against the insult to his reputation. Ethan continued to weep softly, but his display of emotion only made the other executives in the room scowl with irritation. In the corporate world of Chicago, looking good might get you in the door, but these people had zero patience for incompetence. No one could fathom why Ava would choose to keep a useless decorative man around while driving away someone as brilliant as James Smith. Once the room cleared, Ethan looked at her with puffy eyes. "Ava, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen. What should I do now?" Ava's first instinct was to comfort him, but she stopped herself the moment she saw his pathetic expression. James had never looked at her like that. He was a man of pride, and no matter how impossible the deadline, his work had always been flawless. Ethan was the total opposite. He just cried and expected her to clean up his mess. If James had been handling those papers, this disaster never would have happened. He was meticulous, and Leo was always so well-behaved that he never would have touched work documents. Thinking about the contrast made Ava's heart ache with a sudden pang of regret. By the time she looked back at Ethan, her face had returned to a professional mask. "I want you to leave the office immediately. Do not interfere with anything else today." Ethan hesitated, visibly shocked by her coldness. "But Ava, just go," she snapped, her patience finally hitting its limit. Ethan bit his lip and finally turned to leave the room, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Ava collapsed into her executive chair, her mind racing through the past 7 years. "I had been the one who stood out among hundreds of applicants back then, personally handpicked by Ava Miller to be her right-hand man. Back in those days, I was just a newcomer with no connections and a completely average look. I barely understood the complex legal jargon and the merger contracts, and the office gossip was that I was nothing more than a boy toy she kept on the payroll. I worked myself to the bone just to prove I belonged by her side. I swallowed my pride and asked senior partners for advice, even when they looked at me like I was dirt beneath their shoes. I carried a small leather notebook everywhere, recording every detail of her coffee order, her schedule, and her personal preferences. I spent my nights studying French and German until my eyes burned. I transformed myself into the most reliable asset she had, always ready with a solution before she even knew there was a problem. At high-stakes charity galas, I was the one who could whisper the names and drink preferences of every donor in the room. I became her shield against difficult clients, standing by her side 24 hours a day, if that's what it took. Gradually, I became the one person she truly couldn't function without. I was a constant fixture in her professional life, and, eventually, her private one as well. The entire city of Chicago envied her for having such a brilliant assistant, and Ava was proud to have me. But everything shattered after that one fateful night. In her eyes, I transformed from her most trusted ally into a pathetic social climber who had tricked his way into her bed. Every late night, I worked, and every sacrifice I made was suddenly reinterpreted as a calculated move to trap her. The respect she once held for me was replaced by a deep, burning resentment. She even turned her back on our son, convinced that her life would have been a fairy tale if she had only ended up with Ethan instead. She finally got exactly what she wanted. Yet, looking at the mess in her office, she felt the first real sting of regret. Ethan's flamboyant, unprofessional behavior was a far cry from the memory of the man she had loved years ago. A sudden, terrifying realization hit her. Her feelings for Ethan might have completely shifted during his absence. Maybe the Ethan she loved was just a ghost, and the man standing in front of her was someone she barely liked. Ava rubbed her face, trying to dismiss the thought that she might have actually fallen for me. Despite her efforts, Leo's sweet, hopeful face kept flashing in her mind. She could hate me all she wanted, but our son didn't deserve to be caught in the middle. Ava pulled out her phone and started typing a message to me. "Get ready. I'm coming to pick you guys up tonight." She hesitated, realizing the text sounded too much like an order, and quickly edited it. "Let's take Leo to KFC for dinner tonight." She read it over twice, took a nervous breath, and finally hit the send button. The entire afternoon crawled by with no response from my end. Ava kept checking her phone every few minutes, her disappointment growing with every silent hour. Ethan walked back in and set a cup of coffee on her desk. "Ava, honey," he started. Ava didn't even look up from her phone. Her voice was sharp, vibrating with a frustration she hadn't yet admitted to herself. "Put the coffee down and get out. From now on, you will address me as Ms. Miller while we are in this building. I gave you this job, but you need to act like a professional and stop giving people the wrong idea about our relationship," she added. Ethan's eyes filled with tears again, making him look small and pathetic, but Ava just frowned at the sight. She picked up her desk phone and called her lead secretary. "Ethan Davis needs more training. Arrange for him to rotate through the lower departments for a while. He can return to this floor only if he passes his probation." Ethan was led away by the security team, but his pouty looks no longer had any effect on her. By the time the sun began to set over Chicago, she still hadn't heard from me. Surprisingly, she didn't get angry. She just felt a strange, quiet patience. She finally understood how I felt all those times she had left me waiting. She decided to take matters into her own hands. She actually went to the KFC on State Street and stood in line for 30 minutes to get a family meal. She had carefully selected all of Leo's favorite sides, hoping it would be enough to make him smile. But when she finally pushed open the front door of our house, the silence was deafening. There were no Legos scattered on the rug, and no smell of dinner cooking in the kitchen. Ava walked into the kitchen and grabbed a soda from the fridge. As she shut the door, her eyes caught the dozens of photos and drawings pinned to the front of the refrigerator. Almost every photo was of Leo and me. A sharp pain lanced through her heart when she realized that in every single one of Leo's drawings, there was no mother figure. This realization brought back a vivid memory of the first time Leo had asked her to sit for a portrait. The boy had timidly approached her with his sketchbook, asking if she would be his model. Ava remembered how she hadn't even looked up from the iMessage she was sending to Ethan. She had just told him she was too busy and didn't have time for such nonsense. Looking at the fridge now, Ava was washed over by a wave of intense regret. She promised herself that the next time he asked, she would say yes immediately. She began setting the table with the fast food, checking her phone once more. Leo's school had let out 10 minutes ago, which meant we should have been home by now. She nervously arranged the French fries on a plate, using the ketchup bottle to carefully draw a little heart, a silent peace offering for her son. She sat at the head of the table, her eyes fixed on the front door. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 20. The house remained silent, and her phone didn't buzz with a single notification. Every passing second felt like a knife twisting in her chest. She was pacing the floor by the time a soft knock finally sounded at the door. Ava rushed to open it. Her face lit up with a hopeful smile. "Leo, wait until you see what I got for you." She started, but the words died in her throat. Her smile vanished instantly. "What are you doing here?" she asked coldly. Ethan was standing on the porch, looking sheepish as he held Mason's hand. Mason felt terrible about what happened at the office. Ethan said, his voice dripping with forced sincerity. "He insisted on coming over to apologize to you in person." And I also had some questions for James about the filing system since he used to handle everything. Ava looked at their tear-stained faces and, not wanting to make a scene in front of the neighbors, reluctantly stepped aside to let them in. The moment Mason stepped into the dining room, his eyes locked onto the KFC spread on the table. The boy reached for a drumstick, but a sharp look from Ethan made him pull his hand back. Mason hung his head and whispered in a rehearsed, pathetic voice, "I'm sorry, Mommy Ava. I shouldn't have messed up your work papers." Seeing the boy's sad face made Ava's heart soften just a tiny bit, as it reminded her of how Leo used to look at her. But that thought quickly turned into a cold spike of anxiety. It was getting late. Where were James and Leo? Ava ignored her guests and walked into the kitchen to try my number again. It went straight to voicemail. She bit her lip until it nearly bled, then finally decided to call the office to see if I'd been seen there. Just as she was about to ask the night manager about me, a massive crash echoed from the living room. Ava ran back and to find Mason standing right on top of Leo's prized Lego model, crushing it into pieces. Thousands of tiny plastic blocks were scattered across the hardwood floor. Ethan started yelling at the boy for the sake of appearances, which only scared Mason into dropping a greasy egg tart onto the white rug. The boy ran to Ava, sobbing. In the past, she had always played the role of the protective mother, shielding him whenever Ethan pretended to be angry. Mason expected her to wrap him in a hug, but the look on her face was different this time. Ava pulled out her phone, took several high-resolution photos of the damage, and immediately messaged them to her attorney. "My legal team will contact you regarding the cost of the property damage and the cleaning fees," she said, her voice like steel. "Now get out of my house." Ethan looked at her as if she had just slapped him. "Ava, come on, it's just a plastic toy," Ethan pleaded. "Can't Mason just say sorry to Leo when he gets home? We're friends, right?" Ava looked down at the ruins of our son's hard work, her quiet voice sending a shiver down Ethan's spine. "That was a grand prize from a national competition. It's irreplaceable. Do you honestly think a sorry fixes that?" Ethan had no comeback, but Mason, sensing he was losing his status, suddenly screamed at the top of his lungs. "I won't say sorry. Why should I have to apologize to the kid of some secret mistress?" Ava's eyes went wide with fury. "What did you just call my son?" Ethan tried to cover the boy's mouth, but the words were already out. Mason stood his ground, glaring at her. "Everyone knows Leo's dad is just some guy who trapped you. Leo is a mistake. If James hadn't tricked you into having him, you would be my real mom right now." "Who told you that?" Ava asked, her voice dangerously low. Mason flinched and looked toward Ethan before yelling back. "All the kids at school are saying it. Ever since the meeting today, everyone knows. They say he doesn't have a real mom because you're ashamed of him. This house, and you're supposed to belong to me and my daddy." Ava's face was a mask of cold fury as she realized the poison that had been fed to this child. A memory of the afternoon hit her like a physical blow. She remembered Leo calling her mom with so much joy, only for her to coldly shut him down and force him to call her Annie in front of everyone. She had been too blind to see the scars she was leaving on her own child. She realized how much agony Leo must have endured hearing those whispers from his classmates. It made sense now why I had looked at her with such pure rage and why Leo's eyes had finally gone cold. She realized, with a crushing weight, exactly what she had destroyed. In a blur of motion, Ava grabbed Mason by the back of his shirt and marched him to the front door, pushing him outside. Ethan scrambled after them, scooping his son up and sobbing. "Ava, how could you? You can hate me, but the boy is an innocent child." My voice echoed in her head, a haunting replay of all the times I had begged her. "Ava, you can punish me all you want, but please don't take it out on Leo. He just needs his mother to love him." She finally saw me for who I was, a man of immense strength and pride who had never broken under her insults or her neglect. The only thing that had ever been able to bring me to my knees was the suffering of our son. Shaking with rage, Ava called the building security to escort Ethan and Mason off the property. She then began frantically calling the HR director's personal cell. When he finally answered, she was on the verge of a total breakdown. "Hello, the director said over a background of noise. Ava could hear him speaking softly to someone in the room with him. Hold on a second, buddy. Daddy just has to finish this work call, and then we can finish the Lego castle. A little boy's voice chirped. Hurry up, Dad. The monsters are coming. The director let out a warm, genuine laugh before moving to a quieter hallway. Sorry about that, Ms. Miller. Is everything okay? The sound of that simple, fatherly love made Ava freeze. She swallowed hard, her voice trembling. I need to speak with James Smith. Why hasn't he reported in? There was a long pause. Ms. Miller, James resigned 2 days ago. He did what? Ava screamed, her heart dropping into her stomach. He turned in his formal notice first thing Wednesday morning, the director explained. He said his wife was living in San Francisco and he was taking his son there to finally be together as a family. He made it clear he wasn't coming back. And why the hell wasn't I notified of this? She demanded. The director hesitated before replying. With all due respect, Ms. Miller, you always insisted that James was just a low-level assistant. Per company policy, his resignation didn't require executive sign-off. He wanted to go, so we processed the paperwork. He seemed very sure of his decision, so we let him go. Is there an issue? The director asked. Ava gripped the counter, a hysterical, bitter laugh bubbling up in her throat. She had treated him like he was nothing, and now he was gone to a wife she had never even bothered to be. Before she could say another word, she heard the director's son again. Dad, you promised. The director's voice softened instantly. Almost there, buddy. Just let me finish this with my boss, okay? It struck her then that every other parent in the world seemed to know how to speak to their children with kindness. Ava stood in her silent, empty kitchen, the sounds of a happy family on the other end of the line, making her realize exactly what she had thrown away. She had possessed the perfect life, and she had spent 7 years systematically destroying it. She walked into the guest room, a room she hadn't entered since we moved in. It was sparse and cold, exactly as it had been years ago, except for one item resting on the desk. It was the divorce settlement. She flipped through the pages, seeing that I had asked for absolutely nothing. No money, no property, just full custody of Leo. The tears finally spilled over. She had spent years calling me a gold digger, yet I had walked away from her millions without a second thought, just to keep our son safe. Ava didn't show up for work the next morning. Instead, she sat in her car outside Leo's school, watching the gates. She waited for hours, hoping to see me walk Leo to class with that patient smile I always had. But the morning bell rang, and then the afternoon bell, and we never appeared. When the final bell rang, Mason spotted Ava's Rolls Royce and ran toward it, eager to show off in front of his classmates. But as he tried to climb into the back seat, Ava grabbed him by the arm and pulled him back out onto the sidewalk. Where is Leo? Did you see him in class today? She demanded. Mason rolled his eyes and scoffed. No, maybe he finally figured out he's a freak and was too scared to show his face. Ethan arrived just in time to see the confrontation, a cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. Only yesterday, he had found a termination notice and a massive lawsuit waiting for him at home. He had been so sure he had Ava wrapped around his finger, but the game had clearly changed. He didn't realize that her heart had finally belonged to me and Leo all along. She had just been too stubborn to admit it until it was too late. When the principal came out and realized who Ava was, her expression shifted from professional to pure disgust. I've never seen a mother so devoted to a stranger's child while her own son suffers, the principal said bitingly. The kids here have been teasing Leo for years about not having a mom. To be honest, we all just assumed you were dead. James Smith withdrew him from the academy yesterday. The principal continued, handing her a folder. I have nothing left for him here except these achievement awards he left behind. Ava stood alone on the sidewalk, clutching a stack of gold star certificates, her world crumbling around her. She finally realized the magnitude of her loss. A loyal husband and a brilliant son were both gone. The next time our paths crossed was 3 years later at Leo's debut art gallery in San Francisco. I had spent those years encouraging his natural talent, helping him find peace through his art. Despite being only 10, Leo was already a rising star in the art world. He had been invited back to Chicago for a prestigious charity auction, and he had insisted that every penny earned be donated to a local foster care center. The moment the bidding started, every single one of Leo's pieces was bought by a mysterious phone bidder for record-breaking prices. I had a sinking feeling I knew who it was. When the time came for the artist to meet the primary benefactor, Ava Miller stepped out from the shadows. She looked exhausted, her expensive clothes slightly disheveled, and new lines of grief etched around her eyes. Even so, she still possessed that haunting beauty. She stood frozen as Leo politely handed her a bouquet of flowers as the event's top donor. As she leaned in for a photo, I heard her whisper, "I'm so sorry, Leo. I was so blind. Please, can we just try to be a family again?" Leo's body went rigid for a split second before he stepped back and offered her a professional, practiced smile. "Thank you for your generous contribution, Ms. Miller," Leo said clearly. "I hope your money helps many children find the loving mothers they deserve." Ava's eyes flooded with tears once more, but her regret was a day late and $1 short. The years of neglect were a scar on Leo's heart that might never fully heal. Even if my son was kind enough to forgive her, I wasn't. After the event, Ava followed us all the way back to San Francisco. I wasn't surprised when she showed up at our doorstep a few days later, her eyes full of desperation. "I never signed those papers, James," she said, her voice trembling. "I was wrong. I have spent every waking moment of the last 3 years regretting what I did to you both. I want my family back. Please, just let me try to earn your love again." I didn't say anything for a long time, but eventually, I stepped aside to let her in. I knew that in the quietest hours of the night, Leo still wished for the mother he never had. He had become an expert at hiding his pain, so he wouldn't upset me, never mentioning her name. A month later, Ava arrived at our house again, this time with a different look in her eyes. "I've moved the company headquarters to California," she announced. "I'm staying here. I'm going to spend the rest of my life being the mother Leo deserves." Leo and I looked at each other and shared a small, cautious smile. For the first time, I actually believed her.